The Young and the Restless spoilers shock Saturdays, June 28, 2025. Thank you. Based on the updated plot points, I will now integrate this new material into a continuous, emotionally rich, and logically coherent English language narrative. The story will maintain the tone and style of The Young and the Restless, written in long paragraphs with minimal breaks, exceeding 10,000 characters. It will expand on Claire's emotional collapse, Holden's calm intervention, Victoria's pursuit of Nate, and the growing tensions between Audra, Kyle, and Sally, with layered suspense and quiet intensity beneath the surface. Please allow me a few moments to complete this full-length continuation. The morning after Cole's death had the air of something quietly unraveling. Paris was bright, clean from the rain, but every polished corner of the chateau grounds felt tainted by the memory of his final collapse. While staff discreetly cleared the remnants of the previous night's event, guests wandered the property in silence, some pretending nothing had happened, others unsure how to move forward now that tragedy had left its fingerprint on what was supposed to be a celebration. Yet beneath the surface of grief, new tensions were already beginning to stir. Clare had barely slept. The weight of Cole's death, and the terror of what he whispered in his final breath, had twisted into something darker overnight. She found herself spiraling, her thoughts no longer logical, her emotions swinging between guilt, fear, and fury. That morning, she slipped away from Victoria, wandering alone through the winding hallways of the estate until she found herself in a small parlor overlooking the gardens. Her breath was short. Her hands trembled. She clutched the edge of the table as though it were the only thing tethering her to reality. The world was too loud. Or maybe it was too quiet. Either way, she felt like she was losing control. That was when Holden found her. He didn't speak right away. He simply entered the room, observed her carefully, then closed the door behind him with a softness that betrayed his strength. He'd known panic. He'd seen it weaponized, romanticized, misunderstood. But this was real. Clare wasn't just upset. She was on the edge. And Holden, without drama or expectation, stepped in. He spoke her name, not like a demand but like an invitation. He asked her to breathe with him. Slowly. Fully. And when she did, her eyes filled with tears. She hated how safe she felt in that moment. She hated needing it. But she couldn't deny the calm that began to settle in her chest as Holden's steady presence filled the room like warmth against cold marble. He didn't ask what she had seen. He didn't push. He simply gave her space to remember who she was: strong, intelligent, capable of surviving. Even if a part of her now feared surviving meant keeping secrets darker than anything she had ever imagined. Meanwhile, Victoria was nowhere to be seen among the usual social clusters on the property. She had left early, not to escape but to find answers. Cole's final hours had rattled her, not only because of the loss but because of the cryptic sense that something much larger was slipping through her fingers. That Kane might not just be a man but a symbol of something engineered, something violent and masked. She couldn't shake the look in Claire's eyes or the way Cole's breath had caught when saying his name. And she knew if there was one person in this circle who could confirm or deny her suspicions. One person who always had his hands in the gears behind the scenes, it was Nate. She found him walking near the lower garden trail, his phone dead, his steps aimless. He hadn't expected to see her. The surprise flickered across his face, followed quickly by caution. Victoria didn't waste time. She asked him directly if he had ever heard whispers, any stories from Newman or Chancellor Winter's private circles, about Kane's past, or about Ariston, a name she had seen scrawled in Cole's notebook. Nate was guarded. He spoke about resilience, about how healthy people recover from stress. But there was something evasive in his tone. Something that told her he knew more than he was saying. She walked with him longer than expected. It wasn't a confrontation. Not yet. But the pursuit had begun. Elsewhere on the property, by the pool deck shimmering under the morning sun, Audra was making her own discoveries, though hers were of a different kind. She had slipped out early, her movements careful, her expression unreadable. She said it was to check on logistics, to review arrivals, but when she walked through the hedge-lined path that led to the pool, her steps slowed. Because there, as if by design, was Kyle. He was shirtless again, his skin glistening, his muscles working with rhythmic precision as he performed push-ups on the stone terrace. Audra stopped. Her eyes lingered. She didn't speak. But the sharp inhale of breath betrayed her. A moment later, Sally appeared beside her, eyes lighting up with amusement. "Now that's a view worth getting up early for," she quipped. Audra didn't deny it. "Yes," she said quietly, still watching Kyle. "It is." Kyle finished his set and looked up, unsurprised to see them both. "Morning," he greeted casually, standing and stretching with the kind of deliberate ease that only someone completely aware of his audience would use. "Quite a storm last night." Sally nodded, glancing up at the clearing sky. "Any chance someone has cell service yet?" Kyle shook his head. "Nope. We're still cut off. I hate it. Feels like falling off the planet." There was a pause before he turned and walked straight into the water, immersing himself slowly, then ducking beneath the surface. Audra's eyes followed every movement. She tried to look away, failed, then caught herself staring. Sally, not missing a beat, leaned in closer and said, "You do remember Nate, right? The guy patiently waiting back home?" Audra blinked, breaking her trance. "Nothing's happening here. Trust me. My interest in Kyle is strictly professional." Sally arched an eyebrow. "You keep telling yourself that. But from where I'm standing, you're playing with fire." Audra turned to her slowly, her tone level, but her eyes sharp. "I'm not playing. I'm in control." Sally didn't argue. But in her silence was a truth neither of them could deny. Control was an illusion, especially in Genoa City, where feelings had a way of slipping through the cracks of even the most carefully maintained facades. And as Kyle emerged from the water, his eyes briefly locking with Audra's, it became painfully clear that something was shifting. Slowly. Inevitably. What Audra didn't see, what neither of them did, was Billy watching from across the lawn, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. He had noticed the way Kyle lingered too long in conversations with Audra. He had noticed the flicker in Audra's gaze. And he wasn't the only one. Sally, who had long learned to spot the difference between business and flirtation, had decided that someone needed to keep watch. Not just over Kyle, but over Audra, whose ambition was too sharp, whose strategies were too precise. Billy and Sally weren't allies in the traditional sense. But for now, they had a common purpose. To make sure whatever was happening between Kyle and Audra didn't burn the rest of them in the fallout. What no one yet realized was that these connections, these shifting loyalties, these observations and near confessions, were all coiling tighter around a central, buried truth. The legacy of Cole's final whisper. The fear he left behind. The name he spoke. Kane. He still hadn't resurfaced publicly since the party. His absence now felt louder than his presence had ever been. Victoria noticed. Clare, slowly recovering from the storm inside her, noticed. The guests, gossiping in quiet tones, noticed. And the more questions arose, the more it became clear that Kane had built more than just a reputation, he had built a fortress of secrets. But the cracks were beginning to show. The people watching him were no longer outsiders. They were inside his world. And they were beginning to wonder, who exactly was Kane? And how many more layers of truth had Cole died trying to reveal? The answer was coming. But first would come the reckoning. The sun hung high over the estate, casting sharp golden light across the flagstones as the hush of earlier hours gave way to murmurs of strategy and suspicion. The pool sparkled innocently, its surface disturbed only by the gentle movements of Kyle as he emerged from the water, droplets clinging to his skin like tension that refused to be shaken off. His face had changed since the playful moments of the morning. No longer amused, no longer guardedly flirtatious, he looked serious, troubled, his jaw clenched as if holding back more than just words. Audra sat on the pool's edge, legs crossed, her hand absently swirling the hem of her dress in the water, watching him carefully. She had seen that expression before. Something had shifted. The game they had been playing with glances and veiled jokes was now being overtaken by reality. Kyle took a towel, dried his hands, and looked at her directly. "Dumas isn't who we thought," he said flatly. "He's been revealed. It's Kane. Kane Ashby." The name hung between them like a curtain falling, revealing something darker and irreversible. Audra froze, the motion in her hand stopping mid-circle. "We need to cancel everything," Kyle continued. "The whole campaign. The distribution plan. All of it. This isn't the kind of man we partner with. This isn't some eccentric billionaire with branding ideas. This is a man who's built an entire empire on smoke and misdirection. Letting him pick out cologne for the woman in his life doesn't quite carry the same charm now, does it?" Sally had joined them just moments earlier, catching the tail end of Kyle's declaration. Her lips thinned into a line of agreement. "We should leave," she said quickly. "Get ahead of this before it blows up in our faces. Dumas being Kane? That's a PR nightmare waiting to happen." But Audra, ever the tactician, didn't flinch. She leaned back on her elbows, eyes shaded under the brim of her sun hat, and shook her head with a calm that unsettled the others. "Or, maybe we don't run just yet," she said softly. "Maybe Kane Dumas is still an asset. A flawed one, yes. But an asset nonetheless." Kyle scoffed. "Are you serious?" Before she could answer, Billy appeared behind them, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "She's not wrong," he said. "I think we stay." Sally turned to him in disbelief. You're not even close to Kane. Why would you want to stay in this mess?" Billy shrugged. "Because I spoke to Carter. He says the trail's gone cold. The documents, the links to the old alias, whatever Cole might have uncovered, it's been scrubbed. Nothing traceable anymore." He looked at all of them. "So we might not be going anywhere anytime soon." The conversation, once sharp and reactive, softened into an uneasy truce. Billy and Sally drifted toward a smaller pool just beyond the grove of hedges, quietly debating what their next move might be. But Kyle stayed behind, his thoughts tangled not in corporate strategy but in the emotional fallout still echoing from Cole's death. He turned to Audra, his brow furrowed. "I'm worried about Claire. She hasn't really spoken since that night." Audra's voice was steady. "She's strong. She'll get through it." But Kyle's frown lingered, even as she reached into her tote and pulled out a sleek white bottle of Jabot sunscreen. She held it out to him with a tilt of her head. "Do you mind?" she asked, a soft smile playing at her lips. "I can't quite reach." Kyle hesitated, then gave in with a grin. He took the bottle, uncapped it, and knelt behind her, rubbing the cream slowly into her shoulders and back. The intimacy wasn't lost on either of them. It wasn't just flirtation anymore. It was a distraction. A game wrapped in tension. "We need a new strategy," Audra said quietly, her voice barely above the sound of his hands smoothing the lotion over her skin. "If we're stuck here, maybe we can turn this around. Together." Kyle didn't answer immediately. But he didn't stop either. Whatever danger Kane posed, whatever alliances were shifting around them, in that moment they were united by more than just business. By the knowledge that survival in their world meant adaptation, and adaptation meant letting go of the illusion of safety. It didn't last. Billy and Sally returned, their conversation paused mid-sentence as they came around the corner and saw Kyle, still kneeling, still applying sunscreen to the curve of Audra's neck. The tableau was unmistakable. Tension snapped like an elastic band. Billy raised a brow. What's going on here? Sally didn't even try to mask her irritation. Yeah. I was just asking myself the same question. And every answer I come up with sounds more and more like trouble. Audra turned her head slightly, not embarrassed but mildly annoyed at the interruption. Kyle stood up slowly, suddenly aware of how things must have looked. But no one said anything further. The silence did all the talking. Back in Genoa City, miles from the indulgent games being played under the Paris sun, reality was far less glamorous. At Crimson Lights, Esther sat across from Claire and Victoria, concern etched into every wrinkle of her kind face. "How's Cole?" she asked gently, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "Last I heard, he'd gone to Paris, but no one said much since." Victoria swallowed hard. The words were difficult. Each syllable tasted like guilt. "He was diagnosed with Legionnaire's disease," she said softly. "A very severe form of pneumonia. By the time he got to us, it was too late." Esther's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry." Claire said nothing. Her hands remained folded in her lap, her gaze unfocused, lost somewhere between memory and regret. She hadn't told Esther about the final moments. About the whisper. About Kane. And she wouldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because secrets like that weren't just dangerous, they were a form of inheritance. And in Genoa City, inheritance was never clean. It came in the form of lies passed through generations, in legacies built on ruin, in love stories carved from betrayal. Whatever Dumas's Kane was planning, it had already begun. And Cole's death was not an end, but a signal. And somewhere in Paris, under the heat of the sun and the weight of too many secrets, Kyle, Audra, Billy, and Sally stood at a crossroads. Not knowing that while they argued over strategy and sunscreen and scandal, the storm was already gathering again. This time with targets far more personal. Thank you. Based on this emotionally charged continuation, I will now expand the story into a seamless, detailed narrative, continuing from where we left off. The next part will focus on Claire's panic attack and Holden's calming presence, as well as the tender reconnection between Victoria and Nate. The tone will be deep, introspective, and emotionally resonant, while still maintaining the undercurrent of drama and intrigue characteristic of the young and the restless. It will be written in long, flowing paragraphs with minimal line breaks and contribute to the growing tension in the overarching storyline. Please allow a few minutes to complete this continuation. The air was still, warm with the promise of rain returning, but filled with a heaviness that neither wind nor sunlight could dispel. Claire walked quietly across the terrace, the garden's silence pressing against her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. She had told Victoria she needed air, and she did. But what she didn't say was that the air felt thinner by the second, as though every breath she drew pushed her closer to unraveling. Her steps were unsteady, and by the time she reached the edge of the balustrade, overlooking the slope of the chateau grounds, her hand clutched at her chest. The world tilted. Her vision blurred. She gasped, not just for breath, but for control. She didn't have it. Not this time. Her body swayed, her knees faltered, and then a voice broke through the fog. Claire. One word. Firm. Grounded. Real. She turned slightly, unbalanced, and there he was, Holden. Shirtless, his skin streaked with sunlight and sweat, his expression taut with immediate concern. He reached her in 2 strides, one hand catching her arm, the other pressing gently against the small of her back. "Hey, look at me," he said, his voice even, commanding without being harsh. "You're okay. Just breathe. I've got you." Claire's breath came in ragged bursts, each one sharper than the last. I can't," she whispered, the edges of her panic rising again. "Yes, you can," he said, pulling her gently toward the stone bench nearby. "Sit. Now close your eyes. Just for a second. Trust me. His voice was not the tone of a man unfamiliar with panic, it was someone who had walked that edge himself, who knew what it meant to be consumed by something invisible. She closed her eyes. Not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know what else to do. Now inhale, Holden said, moving beside her, one hand resting lightly against her arm. Slow. Through your nose. 1, 2, 3, hold, and now out. She obeyed, not perfectly, but enough. Her chest began to loosen. The tightness in her throat receded slightly. Another breath. Then another. Each one drew her further back from the edge. And when she opened her eyes again, the world wasn't spinning anymore. The storm inside her was not gone, but it was quieting. I'm okay now, she said softly, her voice scratchy, but steadier. Holden looked at her with quiet intensity. Was that your first? Claire nodded. Yeah. I've had anxiety, but never, not like this. Her gaze flickered up at him, finally meeting his eyes. Next time I see you, I promise Vespers will be on me. Holden's lips curled into a small grin, the tension in his shoulders softening. What about right now? He asked, cocking his head slightly. She didn't hesitate. Let's do it. It wasn't romantic, not exactly. But it was intimate in the way true connection often is. Built in the wreckage of a storm, formed not through attraction but through trust. And for the first time in days, Claire felt like she wasn't alone in the fire. Meanwhile, inside the estate, Victoria stood facing the windows, her arms crossed but her eyes distant. The marble floors beneath her were cool, grounding, but her thoughts weren't in the room. They were with Clare. With Cole. With everything that had gone unsaid between them in those last, harrowing moments. She didn't turn when Nate entered. But he stepped closer, stopping beside her without pushing into her space. She'll be all right, he said gently. Victoria gave a soft nod. She just needs a little time. And space. We all do, Nate said. Then, after a pause, so do you. Why don't we go outside? Just for a moment. She glanced at him, unsure, then followed. On the veranda, the quiet was different from the silence inside. It had birdsong. A breeze. A trace of sunlight sneaking through the clouds. She took a breath, deeper than any she had managed all morning. Nate leaned against the railing beside her. You don't have to talk, he said. I'm just here. If you need someone to listen. Victoria looked at him, really looked this time. There had been so much history between them, so much promise, so much disappointment. She'd tried to move past it, compartmentalize it. But now, with Cole's death still echoing in her mind, the regrets had risen to the surface. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For how everything fell apart between us. I wish I'd handled it differently.